And now moving into a completely different issue, an issue of statehood, an issue of national sovereignty, an issue of names, international and national names, and most prominently the Macedonia naming dispute, which occurred in started around 8 years ago between Greece and Macedonia, a dispute that was resolved with the Prespes Agreement in 2018. Today we will look into whether the Prespes Agreement was a success story, and are there lessons to be learned for the issue at hand that interests us most, the Cyprus problem. Let us welcome to the floor Mr. Nikola Dimitrov, former Foreign Minister of North Macedonia, and Mr. Athanassios Ellis, if I may say so, a legendary figure in journalism. As a colleague, I would like to say that, Editor-in-Chief of Kathimerini, English edition, published in Cyprus and Greece. I'm hoping to a very interesting and engaging discussions on the lessons of North Macedonia and how this doesn't affect Cyprus, and what lessons can be learned from that process and how it ended up. Gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. A lot of people are talking about solving problems, and especially in Cyprus, we talk always about how to solve the Cyprus problem. We heard from some diplomats, we heard from the UN, but here we have somebody who has done that. He has solved an issue, a major issue for his country and Greece and for the Balkans. So I'd like to ask you to go a little bit back in time and briefly, of course, if you can do it in a few minutes, how was that done? Because for 25 years plus, we had the name issue, and that was a problem for us, for you, for the Balkans. How did you manage to do it? And actually, we also had another angle, so you can answer that too. The UN was involved through Matt Nimitz, like it is here, but at the end of the day, the two countries were able to solve it by themselves. So I'm just wondering, you can explain the formula or your experience.
Yes, I appreciate the opportunity, and I want to thank the organizers Oxygono and the Delphi Economic Forum for having us here. And learning from the words of the philosopher Zeno, who was mentioned today from Citium, one of his sayings is, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we should listen more than say. So I will do this humbly. Our lessons may or perhaps may not be useful for the issue of Cyprus. I grew up with the name issue, first as a diplomat, then as an activist politician and a foreign minister, when we finally did it with my friend and then colleague Nikos Koutsias. It was quite an experience. As you mentioned in your question, we did it ourselves. So the Prespa agreement that solved the name issue was homemade. There were people who were helpful, such as our mediator, who was the longest-serving UN mediator in the history of the United Nations, Matthew Nimitz, and who was actually involved in the 70s as a counselor of the State Department under Cyrus Vance, also here in Cyprus. My first visit as foreign minister was to Athens. It was mid-June 2017. And I decided to go to Greece first because this was where our biggest issue was, our biggest challenge. And my message was, if you want to have a friend to your north, and predictability and reliability, now is the time to try to solve this. Initially, we were testing each other. I think both Nikos and me, by the way, there was no name issue, even though he was Nikos and my first name is Nikola. Like there is not a serious name issue between Lefkosia, I think, and Nicosia here in Cyprus. There was no blame game. Usually when there is a blame game, this is a signal that there are no serious negotiations taking place. And increasingly, we started to trust each other on a personal level, at the level of the two prime ministers, at the level of the governments. One important thing is to really understand the concern of the other, to learn to feel and to think as if you're in the shoes of the other side. Then we managed to divide the issue into several elements, and dividing an issue into elements is helpful in terms of making a combination that perhaps could work. A serious compromise is such that some people say leave both sides equally unhappy. And if we judge by the effort that was required to actually approve the Prespa agreement both in Skopje and in Athens, this is a good compromise. It took quite an effort. There was quite an opposition. We, I think, took care of the key concerns on both sides. For the Greek side, this was the distinction. And for us, it was who we are, our identity. It took a lot of political credit, political capital, to solve an issue that is old and deeply entrenched. It requires political capital, and I think one has to reconcile that winning next elections will be a question. So one has to think more about the next generation and the longer-term future than the immediate political profit. Maybe that will come later, but you invest political capital. Then, as you move on and when you come close to a solution, the cost of failure is also increasing. So there is a bit of an incentive to actually really do it. And I remember with Koutsias, we were both receiving threats. He from his compatriots, I from my compatriots. In a way, we've become allies on the side of the solution, and our adversaries, our opponents, were those against the solution from both sides of the border. What we did was we proved that you can actually solve a difficult problem, that miracles are possible even in our region, with persistency, with stubbornness. To solve a stubborn problem, you have to out-stubborn the problem in a way. And we paved the way for something that is so natural for two neighbors, and this is friendship. There are many issues with the implementation of the Prespa agreement, but one thing is obvious, and this is that with time, the situation has calmed down. The problem is not alive. And I think even with more time, even the big opponents of the Prespa agreement will face the reality that this was actually a good thing to do.
So time heals.
Time heals if you really solve the problem and cover the concerns on both sides. If you cover the concern of one side, the issue is still alive. So this is what we did. One of the benefits, there are many, increased economic cooperation. I myself crossed the Greek border probably 9 times this year. And many of our citizens do the same. So there is a very lively back and forth.
Which I assume helps in the implementation, not institutionally, but the climate becomes...
The climate is much more positive, and the problem is not alive. Even if there are politicians from both sides who would like to use it, it's going to be increasingly difficult to actually use it, because the issue is solved. And one of the concrete benefits of the agreement was the establishment of the diplomatic relations between North Macedonia and Cyprus. when I was foreign minister and when the president, Nikos,
Everybody's Nikos in this. And actually his predecessor, Athanassios,
also,
I mean,
we actually we established the diplomatic relations between our countries.
and now that you mentioned that, if you can do that briefly, is there any lesson to be learned on this part of the world, Cyprus, with its issue and division, from the successful agreement in Prespa? It's a whole different situation. I realize, but I'm just wondering, somebody who has solved the international issue for his country, could the Cypriots take something out of it? Maybe the fact that as time goes by, time heals, as you said.
I think it's worthy. It's a noble effort to do for your nation. In Harvard, they define leadership as helping your nation, your local community, your company, in this case your nation, face reality. And problems, when they're ignored, they have this stubbornness, they grow. So this will not be solved on its own. Efforts will have to be made. And at the end of the day, from this perspective, after the solution, I can face myself in the mirror without any second thoughts. I think I did a favor for my nation and for the friendship between Greece and North Macedonia, but I think we should be modest and stop here when it comes to making analogies between the two problems.
In the final few minutes that we have, and since this discussion deals a lot about transparency, I was just wondering how the accession process is going. It's not going that well for the Western Balkans, your country and others. But one of the criticisms from the Europeans, even from well-intentioned people, is that there are not enough reforms. Transparency issues are still there and sometimes becoming worse. Where is the process going, and is transparency still a problem, and to what extent?
Thank you for this question. In most of my adult life, I've been a diplomat operating under the premise that once we solve the big picture issues, NATO accession, European Union membership, that will be it, the country will be fixed. Now, with some experience in government, and I am now on the civil society side, I think that the European integration process is extremely important, but not sufficient to bring about real change at home. For real change at home, you have to have domestic agents of change, citizens, civil society, courageous leaders and politicians. The European integration has absolutely lost any steam. It has become a double bluff game for years now. We, EU, pretend we are interested, and we, the candidate countries, pretend we reform. There is sort of a new opportunity with the war in Ukraine and the Ukrainian bid for membership. Enlargement is at least back as a priority. There is an ongoing debate. As you know, the European promise to the region was given in Thessaloniki in 2003. 20 years after, we don't have much to show. Croatia joined 2013, and that was it. So I think to make this a success, we need more seriousness on both sides. On the side of the EU, to recognize that this is unfinished business, that it is in the interest of the EU to do it. And here, I think Greek leadership can help, because Greece is a long-standing member, part of our region. It can lead us to strengthen democracy and increase prosperity, but also there is a lot of homework on our side. And this is not only paying lip service and saying the right things, but actually doing the right things. And the problem in my country and throughout the region is rampant corruption, political clientelism, political parties, it's a winner-take-all type of a democracy where institutions serve not the public interest, but the party interest. And whether we talk about teachers or medical doctors or judges or public prosecutors, they all need party political backing. And we need to make that jump, and we need more meritocracy in the way governance is done in our countries. We also need a more principled European Union, because why do we look up to the West? Because of the principles and the belief that this is a community of values. So do not turn a blind eye, do not shy away from criticism, even if there is a government that you have a good relationship with. When it comes to the basics, freedom of the media, rule of law, independence of state institutions, you have to be bold, you have to call a spade a spade. So this is doable. I said miracles are possible. We have, in a way, an opportunity building up. I think we will really do our continent a favor if we use it.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. We condensed our time to the exact 15 minutes. Thank you. And the floor back to you.
Many thanks to former Foreign Minister of North Macedonia for his valuable insight at a very critical time for Cyprus and, I might say, across Europe with the war raging in the Ukraine, and Mr. Ellis for his valuable experience and input. Many thanks.